The summer I turned 7, we visited my grandparents 3 hours away. About an hour into the drive home, I was stretched out in the back seat of the van with my head on a wheel bump out, looking up through the windows at the stars. I suddenly noticed a strange, glowing object in the sky, about 30 feet above and to the left of us, matching our speed and direction. This thing was soundlessly gliding along beside us in the exact same position to us the whole time. It was between us and the trees on the other side of the road and lower than the treetops. It was smallish, but its size was really hard to tell because it was constantly changing shape. I'd guess it had the mass of a small refrigerator, perhaps. It morphed smoothly from a square to a diamond, to a circle, to an oval, to a swirls, to spikes, and everything in between, while also rotating in different directions. It glowed brightly from inside, and as it morphed shapes, it also changed colors, like neon flowing beneath the surface. It turned all colors of the rainbow as it morphed, and the brightness also pulsed with the shifting of shape and color. The closest thing I can compare it to is the Windows Screensaver 3D flower box that came out a few years later. Excitedly, I shouted to my family to look at this strange thing. My brother joined me on that side of the van and watched it with me. We both tried to get our parents' attention, but they didn't answer us, didn't look, just kept driving like they didn't hear us or see the thing following us. I remember my brother and I just staring in amazement and wondering at this thing putting on a light show in the sky for several minutes. The next thing I remember, we were pulling into the driveway. I didn't really realize how odd this ordeal was until many years later, and several more strange occurrences. I realized I have no memory of how it ended and got kind of freaked out. I called my brother and asked if he remembers the event. He remembers it just as I do. I asked how it ended. He said he doesn't remember either. Did it fly away, go dark, poof out of existence? Neither of us know. We went to our parents and asked about it. Both of them remember my brother and I talking about it after the fact, but neither of them remember anything unusual about that night. As far as they know, we slept quietly all the way home. What was that object? What happened that night? How did it end? Why didn't my parents react? Why are my brother and I missing 2 hours of memories? My mother and I were watching Jaws back in like 2005 late one night, like around 10 p.m. or something. It was the summer holidays, so I didn't have to worry about school or anything. We heard someone knocking on our door, and we lived in an apartment complex and figured it was one of the neighbors, or our cousins who lived across the parking lot from us. My mother opened the door, and I went with her since the kitchen was beside the door to grab a snack. We both instantly felt uncomfortable near the door, and I could see that she was talking to a kid who couldn't have been any older than 7 years old, and he was asking to come in because he couldn't find his mother, and he was persistent on coming in. For some reason, my mother and I were dead set on refusing to let him in, so she offered to hand him her phone. He nodded, and she went to grab her phone from her desk, and when she came back, he was gone. My mother was freaked the fuck out, and so was I. She told me the part that made her most uncomfortable was that his eyes were completely black, but she played it off as some trick of the light. Eventually, a few years later, I was reading about urban legends, myths, and the supernatural, and I came across something called black-eyed children and nearly shit myself. Then, come to find out, said apartment complex was built on an Indian burial ground to boot. We still don't know who that was at the door, or what they wanted, if they were an actual human child or the black-eyed children. I was about 11 years old. I lived in a trailer park and was walking across a field fairly early in the morning on a winter day, and the sky was overcast with gray clouds. I saw a faint, jittering spotlight on the ground, but nothing in the sky to create it. After checking the sky, I looked back down for it and saw it jittering around over me now. I looked back up and saw an extremely small jet black dot. The dot very rapidly dilated and appeared to be moving towards me, but I didn't think it actually moved. Prismatic light poured out of the hole or dot in the shape of small branches in a way that looked similar to a feather. Within that, another black dot formed that immediately was filled by a large translucent orb with many small geometric shapes moving around inside of it. The orb was surrounded by illuminated dust-shaped like tentacles, and the particulates were sparking, as if small electrical signals were coursing through it. The tentacles congealed into one, and it enveloped me. I couldn't move my eyes or even body, and felt like I was levitating. It seized control of my vision and proceeded to communicate with me via my mind's eye, for the lack of better words. Afterward, I fell to the ground and felt like I was on fire. There was no wind, yet I saw wind moving the grass and trees. I felt it release, and suddenly it was very cold, and I began to emit steam and began crying like a little bitch for a very long time. Months later, I noticed where this had occurred, the grass never became green again. I didn't tell anyone for nearly a decade because I felt afraid due to the nature of the vision and the highly conservative religious environment of my town. Not sure how this qualifies, paranormal or extraterrestrial. Seemed to be both at the same time in a way. I won't go into the ramifications of what I saw, but I did later see an ancient Catholic mural that I think represented it. It was a symbol for a Seraphim Angel, represented by an eye with 6 wings around it. I've never met anyone with a similar story.